So welcome to Bitesize Edge and another one of our podcasts. And today I have the absolute privilege of talking to Mick Dawson. Mick Dawson is a former Royal Marine Commando. He's now a filmmaker, a professional sailor and an adventurer. I love that. I'd love to kind of go, I'm an adventurer. That'd be awesome. He's best known for rowing the Pacific with his friend Chris Martin in a state-of-the-art vessel called Bojangles. That always reminds me of the song that I'm sure Frank Sinatra sung it to start with, but I have the Robbie Williams version going off in my head right now. Mick built the vessel in 2009, and they sailed 7,000 miles. It took them a total of 188 days, 10 hours and 55 minutes, and it became a world first. And it's in the Guinness Book of Records. It's pretty fabulous. He's gone on to do many more rowing challenges, and he also works very closely with the Royal Marines charity. I've got the absolute privilege and delight to speak to him. I want to explore a number of things, not least of all his recent book, Never Leave a Man Behind. So here I am with Mick. Mick, thank you for joining me today from near Brighton, you said.
Yep, Peacehaven, just up the road from Brighton.
Fabulous. And as I said to you before we came on air, I have water envy. I really do. So I would aspire massively. I do aspire, and I will at some stage be living somewhere near the sea for sure.
I recommend it. You can't beat a good walk by the sea if you need some time to sort yourself out.
Yeah, absolutely. So Mick, you've got a very full background. Phenomenal read. I found it absolutely fascinating reading about all your endeavours. It would be really great if you could talk to us a little bit around the Cockleshell Endeavour, Cockleshell Endeavour, and how that came about, and really what you focus on.
It evolved really from my original sort of passion. My passion's always been the ocean, but that led to ocean rowing, which in turn led to rowing the Atlantic a couple of times, the North Pacific solo a couple of times, slightly less successful than I'd planned, before being successful and becoming the first and still the only people, myself and Chris Martin, to row almost 7,000 miles from Japan to San Francisco. And that really, I thought that was the end of those adventures. But fortunately, and by chance, events took over. I was asked to take an old friend of mine who I served with in the Marines back to the Falklands for his 50th. As veterans of the war, we could go back by flight. We went back. And a long story short, during that trip, he explained, actually at the top of Mount Harriet, which he'd fought on as an 18-year-old Marine, that he'd approached one of the major mental health charities in the UK for the military for issues, not as much that he thought he had, but his family thought he had, with PTSD. They'd in turn said, yeah, you tick pretty much all the boxes for that. Go away for 3 months, no alcohol, no drugs, and we'll diagnose you officially. And I was horrified when he said this. And he's literally stood by the cross at the top of Mount Harriet to mark the guys who were lost there. And he said, if I could do that, Mick, I wouldn't need their help, would I? And I thought, no, you wouldn't. That's exactly the case. So I said, well, we'll sort something out. We'll sort a project out to get you through that 3 months. And that project eventually became the Cockleshell Endeavour, which initially was to kayak around the Falklands.
So this is Sparky?
No, that confuses the story slightly. That the two principal protagonists are both called Steve.
Love it.
This was Steve Grenham, and as I say, obviously Sparky, again unexpectedly, I met later on, and he became the first blind person to row the Pacific.
And he was a novice rower as well, I gather.
A novice would suggest he'd actually been on a rowing boat before. He was a complete beginner. Yeah, but as I explained to him at the start, I said, don't worry about it, mate. We'll have at least 2 months to learn to row on the trip, which we did, near 3, actually.
Wow, okay. And what do you actually do within, so I've had the pleasure of working with people from the armed forces with some of the work that we do with NLP. And there's been a consistent theme that they've talked about, which is the support that's given when they return from service, and how there are varying thoughts, there's varying kind of opinions as to whether it was good enough, any good, lacking, all those sorts of things. How is what you do at Cockleshell different? What's your USP with this one, Mick?
Well, again, it evolved out of the work I did with Steve Grenham. Obviously, we were novice kayakers as well, because we like to start from scratch with these things. So we had to learn to kayak. And first thing we learned was actually just getting physically fitter, and the discipline of having to train regular was a big help to him. It just gave him some structure, gave him self-confidence again. As I said, it reminds you who you were. And as he said at the end of it, it reminded me of who I am. And it was just that process of doing something physical, challenging with some focus and structure. More importantly, I think it also, again, this evolved, it became obvious that putting two people together on that project was key. When we were in the same boat, in a double boat doing the project, benefits were fantastic. When we separated at one point, we did the Yukon Great River Quest, a 140-mile non-stop race. That's quite alarming. We did the Yukon Great River Quest. We were in separate boats.
Right.
It was still a fantastic project. We got loads out of it, but we stopped talking because we weren't together in the boat. We weren't talking, and that was the principal game. When we were in the boat, we both had similar histories. We were friends, so we spoke the same language. We had the Royal Marine connection. And when we were in that situation, dealing with challenges together, we got talking. And once we got talking about its problems, and that communication opened up. And it was just that discovery that put people together on the water, especially for me. The water is a big part of it, be it a river or the ocean. It gets people together, especially if you've got people together with similar histories, similar experiences. They'll talk. Once you get talking, everything opens up and everything can start from that point.
So, a couple of things that you said there. I mean, I hear what you're saying. It's really interesting that when you went out to separate boats, that you really noticed the difference that took place with the lack of communication. Something that you said there that really resonated with some of the conversations I'd had previously with these guys was around when they came out of the forces, was a lack of structure that they were so used to in their life. And when you layer that then with some of the challenges that they might now be facing, it is almost, a scattergun almost approach, for a better phrase, in thinking and being able to get some form of structure and focus back into their world was a really good starting point. Would you agree?
Totally. I think, and again, this is my opinion. I can't give you too much medical fact to back it up, but I think there's a bigger issue now with transition than PTSD or even physical injuries. Obviously, they are a real problem, but they're a small percentage. I think the bigger issue, more relevant for more people, is that transition, because there's never been really a bigger gap in the transition from service life to civilian life. It couldn't be more different. As romantic as this idea might sound, or sentimental, you're in the services, and it doesn't matter which service you're in, there's this family ethos, and the people around you are there to support you. That's how it works. That's how the Marines work. Any units like that, the person next to you will pretty much sacrifice their life for you. That's the ethos. When you go into Civvy Street after living that life for a while, outside your family, that ethos doesn't exist, or very, very rarely. And I think that can sometimes come as a big shock. And that transition is as important to overcome as physical or mental health injuries sometimes.
Yeah, I can imagine. I wonder actually if in some ways it's almost the polar opposite when you come out into Civvy Street at times, from a perspective of having that level of support and family unity, from a bigger perspective that I assume you would have in the forces. Yeah. So tell me about your trip with Sparky then. Tell me about Sparky.
Well, again, it wasn't planned. I thought I finished all the work with Steve Grenham that we were doing with 4 years. Well, 3 years it took from the top of Harriet to eventually return to the Falklands and circumnavigating the islands in a double canoe. Wanted more. We were doing more stuff, but the devices to Westminster and getting veterans in canoes to race that sort of thing. And then I walked into my local pub and found out that Steve Sparks was going to be in there that night. I hadn't seen Steve Sparks for 38 years. He walked in. I went down to meet him, and within 2 hours, we'd arranged to row across the Pacific in a race from California to Hawaii.
Of course you had.
as you do, all great adventures. On a serious note, the reason for that really was that I knew that Steve Sparks had lost his sight in service in the 80s. Right. I didn't know what had happened to him. And quite frankly, it was shocking when I found out. He was literally... if Steve Grenham fell through the support network with issues with PTSD, Steve Sparks was totally abandoned by the system in the 80s. It was quite shocking to hear that as a young man, effectively going blind at the time, he was literally shown the door with no rehabilitation, no support, no compensation, no anything. And he didn't get any rehabilitation for 10 years until Blind Veterans UK used to be Bumpton, as you might remember.
Yes.
That's how I remember them. But it's Blind Veterans UK, and they're centred to less than 2 miles from my favourite pub, the Coach, and Steve was up there, and we'd walked into the local for a beer and knew the landlord. When I found out this story, I felt guilty. I thought we'd let him down as individuals who knew him. System certainly had, and I said, well, let's do something to make up for that. And the landlord actually suggested or asked, as any blind person rowed across an ocean. I didn't think they had then. But then I found out one of Sparky's friends, an ex-sailor, a Royal Navy sailor, had rowed across the Atlantic. So we thought we'd better go and do the Pacific.
And remind me, how long did that take?
That took 82 days, 16 hours and 54 minutes.
82 days, 16
Not
hours.
that we were counting.
Not that you're counting. Those 15 minutes mean so much. I'm absolutely sure. So what do you do from a mindset perspective, Mick? There must be a multitude of things that are going on for you at that moment in time, or that moment in time, that whole length of time. Not least of all from just how you change the structure of your days, your sleep deprivation to a degree, I suspect, the conditions, everything else. What's the kind of big challenges that take place for you in that situation?
I suppose to a certain extent, for me, it's become more normal because effectively my 6th ocean row. But it's never a normal situation, and it's a total opposite of what you would consider normal on dry land. The routine you work on a boat, generally speaking, and everything's got to be flexible in a team setup, would be 2 hours on, 2 hours off. Right. And that's around the clock, non-stop. Whenever you can row, you have to keep up that momentum. And that was based really back in 2001 when I rode the Atlantic with my brother. We discovered that we could keep the pace up for 2 hours. If you row for longer, you tend to drop off in the last hour. It's a trial and it's physically exhausted. You get a little bit more sleep, which is great, but that's not the key. The key is to row as efficiently as possible. And you can, Chris Martin and I rowed across the North Pacific for 6.5 months using that routine religiously. So we did it for that long. You can do it for 2 or 3 months, but it is absolutely the most painful and challenging thing you'll ever do. The sleep deprivation is by a long way, the worst thing about ocean rowing. So
if it's the most challenging and awful thing you can do in that regard, what's the draw for you? I mean, what is the draw for this?
Oh, it's magical. The place is magical. You at any moment on any given day, the most incredible thing can happen. It doesn't on a lot of occasions. You can be weeks with very little happening at all. But at any moment, you can see something incredible happen next to the boat. On one of my solo trips across the North Pacific, I had something like 60 or 70 close encounters with all manner of species of whales. And that's from sei whales, right whales, pilot whales, minke whales, not humpback, strangely enough, sperm whales, and on one occasion a blue whale. which was like an experience from another world. I mean, they're just so huge. And I spent 45 minutes rowing alongside a blue whale on my own in the Pacific Ocean. So when you can focus on things like that, 2 hours on, 2 hours off, the cold, the wet, the swords, the blisters, the isolation, the hard work are all worth it.
And so when you're rowing on your own as well, it's still 2 hours on, 2 hours off.
No. It's
I was going to say, what happens to the boat?
You have to adapt it. You can't afford to be quite as exhausted as you can be as a pair. You haven't got anybody else to pick up the slack.
Yeah.
What I tended to do on the North Pacific, really, which was my solo rows, was I'd row solidly from daybreak until almost dusk, and then I would make a meal, and then I'd row a couple of hours into the night, and then go to sleep for the night period, which was actually on most of the summer in the Pacific was quite a short period of time. I'd sleep for 4, certainly not much more than 4, maximum 5 hours. It would become dawn and you'd wake up naturally. And during the day, I would row at a slower pace, really. You wouldn't push yourself to the same degree. I'd have 4 meal stops that would break up that rowing. And I would accept the fact that if I got tired, I would just literally have a 30-minute nap. But you have to be quite strong with that. It's very easy for that to become a half an hour. Half an hour becomes 2.5 hours. So you have to be disciplined, but you have to also realise on your own that you've got to function over a long period of time at a consistent level. You can't be pushing yourself to exhaustion throughout.
So mindset obviously is absolutely key in all of this. What's the difference in the mindset you have for a solo voyage to having a voyage with someone else? How does your mindset differ, Mick?
For me, it's a responsibility.
Okay.
It's you taking risks with somebody else's life, not your own. Make no bones about that. Anybody who steps onto the sea, even for a job, what we consider a normal job at sea, you take your life to some degree. There is a risk there because it's potentially a hostile environment. And I was very aware that decisions you make, that I would not hesitate for myself. I would reconsider because there's somebody else on that boat, and the fact that I was far more worried about them than I ever was about myself.
Okay. So would you describe yourself also then as someone who is perfectly happy being on your own to be able to do okay.
Yeah, I would have done until this year.
But you've had no choice, yeah?
Yeah, well, it's a different kind of isolation. There is that choice factor. I chose to be there. If you take
and how do you, what kind of, because you've got all that time to yourself, you have some phenomenal experiences. I can only imagine what it must be, can't even imagine actually what it must be like to be, rowing alongside a blue whale who's potentially reminding you that you're in his domain. Absolutely.
As everything does out there.
Yes, absolutely. But how do you just keep yourself going? What sort of dialogue, internal dialogue and things, happen for you? I'm someone who I love time on my own, and I love time on my own because I know I've got the out to be with people fairly quickly. I live with someone, as you know, and all the rest of it, and we've got children. But I've got the opportunity to go and lock myself away or go for a long walk, or when we're allowed out, do triathlons and stuff like that. But I always know there's other people around me if I want them there. How do you keep yourself going through that time?
I think part of it was I saw it as an enormous opportunity to find out stuff about myself. I mean, to give you an idea of where my mindset was at the time, when I set off on one of my solo rows, I lost communications out of Japan. Satellite phone was broken after day 12. Ultimately, I was at sea for 4.5 months before, unfortunately, I sank. But for that 4 months, or 4 months of that 4.5 months, I had no communication, so I didn't speak to anybody. And I consider that probably the best 4 months of my life.
Really?
Yeah, not something I'd necessarily want to repeat, but as an experience, I didn't it would be a bonus sometimes to escape to that degree. But I saw all of it as, well, this isn't forever. This is now. This is an experience, and I'll benefit from it. And I did, because there's nowhere to hide. I found out an awful lot about myself, good and bad, during that 4 months that you can very easily cover during normal life, because there's ways to mask it. There's nowhere to hide on a rowboat when every single thing is down to you.
Would you be happy to share some of the things you learned about yourself during that time? I'll let you be selective.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm happy to share. Most of it was positive. The principal thing was I actually thrived on it. In fact, I remember, I think I write it in the book. I remember when the phone broke, I was actually relieved, and I said to myself, right, now we'll find out what I'm made of. Because we had, I mean, you don't have much comms anyway, but I had a weather router, and I would get information about the weather. And fantastic, a great guy, fantastic information, but it often it wasn't easy to react to that where I was. My circumstances were very individual to that single position, whereas the bigger picture for him wouldn't bring that into play. And it was actually quite difficult. I found myself being micromanaged, and I didn't like that. I said, I will make these decisions. And as soon as that comms wasn't there, it was easy. I made those decisions without even thinking about it. So I like that. I like the fact that I was able to adapt that well to that situation. It most certainly, as I think probably people will be realising now, something that they didn't realise before, the importance of other people. That really, that's the only thing that matters. Everything else is incidental. That's the priority. So that opportunity to be away from friends and family and loved ones enhanced those relationships, take away from it. And I had a huge benefit in that I spent a lot of time literally on my own at sea and never felt lonely. Because you know, I'm sure you can be in the middle of London surrounded by people, and you can be the loneliest person on the planet. But equally, you can be in the middle of the Pacific, literally thousands of miles from anyone, and not feel lonely. So that again was something that was brought home to me. How lucky I was. Before I even set foot on a rowing boat, those things were in place to make me the person I am.
Incredible. Yeah, it plays with my mind slightly, thinking about that period of time. There were so many elements to that dynamic that I perceive in a very conscious, in a very I'm in my house kind of way, that would play with my mindset. And it was amazing. I loved hearing you say that the vast majority of it was positive. You know, we tend to have a negativity bias. You know, as individuals, we're drawn to go before we go woohoo. And it's you know, I see myself as someone who goes woohoo. But equally, when you said that, Mick, I had that moment of kind of going, oh dear me, 4 months not talking to anyone. That's pretty huge.
Yeah. I mean, it had its drawbacks. There were times it would have been nice to have a chat. But I always looked at it, well, this will be over. This isn't forever. This will be over, and I'll be better at the end of this experience, which I will. I mean, I'm hugely grateful for that. I probably wouldn't have wanted it. Like most of the bad things that happen to us, we don't want them to happen, but there's usually, if you look deep enough, there's usually a benefit, and it's like you have to concentrate on that.
So how would you compare that then to kind of the situation we've been in? Hopefully we're coming out of it fairly soon. But the situation we've been in, where we've been kind of put into an enforced isolation, as you say, it's not going to be forever. But you're obviously a highly resourceful individual, Mick, as we all are. But it's the awareness of the resource, which I think is key, and you clearly have a good awareness of it. What would be your advice to people who are struggling with the isolation we find ourselves in now?
Well, there's a few things, really. That key thing I mentioned earlier is that I chose to do what I did, which is fine. That does make it easier to deal with the challenges, because if you choose to do it, you take responsibility. So you're immediately setting yourself up to deal with the challenges. But lots of things happened along that way that I didn't choose to happen, and they would, defeated me. pretty much like life. And now something's come along that we didn't choose to, that's quite challenging. It's very challenging. Take responsibility. If you say, right, I'm going to deal with this, that's half the battle. Because as soon as you say, I'm going to deal with this, not that I'm been, banged from pillar to post by these events, but I'm actually going to deal with this. Suddenly you go, right, okay, so I'm ready to deal with it. Mentally and physically, you feel ready for that challenge, and you immediately think, right, what's the first thing I need to do? And so you say, right, I'm going to deal with this, and I'm going to take it one step at a time. And don't look at this long picture, the newspaper headlines of what's going to happen next July or what have you. Look at what you need to do to achieve the next goal. To get through something productive this week, and break it down into bite-sized chunks.
Yeah.
At the beginning of this, it's over a year ago that we were looking at this. If I'd have said then that we're going to be in this situation a year, it would have been overwhelming. But what happened is people got into the routine of dealing with one thing a step at a time. And that was the same. The North Pacific, huge. 6 months at sea it was going to be. If you look at that as a whole, it just overwhelms you.
Yeah, totally.
If you break it down into what am I going to achieve today, suddenly you're just getting one achievement after another, all the benefits from achieving that. If there's a setback, it's only a day's setback. And then you look up and suddenly we're at the end of the challenge.
And do you have a level of gratitude when you get to each one of those, at the end of each of those days, that you kind of achieve that step, that you're kind of grateful for the opportunity, but also kind of congratulate yourself on having done that?
I think I was guilty of not doing that. That's one of the things that I learned, particularly with the row with Chris. I mean, it's two guys on a boat the size of a large dining room table for 6.5 months, dealing with the most incredibly hostile environment. I mean, we just phenomenal what we had to put up with getting across. When we were getting into San Francisco, and even 2 days from getting in, we didn't think we were going to make it. That's how difficult. And then we got a day, basically a 24-hour period from Point Reyes, just 30 miles northwest of Golden Gate Bridge, to the bridge, which was effectively a coastal road. Once we got inside that point, it was a relatively straightforward road compared to everything else. And it allowed us to actually acknowledge what we'd achieved. And I'm so grateful for that one day when most of the pressure off, was able to enjoy what we'd achieved. And I think people in general can be guilty of just, right, let's move on to the next thing. And you should just take a breath and go, you know what, that was a job well done, or, that was great fun, or whatever it is. Don't just move on and look for the next big high. Acknowledge the one that you've had.
That kind of reminds me of a conversation I was having recently around this instant need for gratification that seems to be present, and the kind of the requirement of, you said about it then, what next? And I think about my children. If I think about other kids and teenagers I know, the need for constant stimulation, as opposed to being present and actually kind of go, oh, that was a really good day, that I did some fabulous art, went for an amazing walk, whatever it might be. But there's we've almost got ourselves into a culture of what next.
Yeah, and it almost devalues what would last.
Yeah,
as if that didn't matter. We're moving on to the next one. And I mean, most of the lessons I've learned, it's great. Hindsight's 20/20. But they're important lessons for me. It's looking back and seeing those lessons, and how naive I was about certain things, and dismissive of things that are obviously so important.
Yeah, and if you're able to, if you think about all the voyages that you've done, what are the ones that stand out? Are you able to go, oh, yep, that was my favourite? No. I was asked this question quite recently, and it's impossible. I'm so privileged to have had those experiences, and each one of them, some were in different ways more challenging, but from rowing across the Atlantic with my brother, when only a few dozen people had done it, that in itself is huge. To rowing across the Atlantic with a complete stranger at 24 hours notice, fantastic. And then the solo rows, I'm just so privileged to have had that experience. The row with Chris across the North Pacific, to look up after what was effectively 8 years of work, having sunk in the Pacific on my own, to then suddenly look up
the Golden Gate Bridge is there and shake hands with the guy who's made that possible. That's a pretty amazing experience. And then when I think all that's over, I get to row across the Pacific and get to Hawaii with the first blind man to do that and shake his hand. But I think I wouldn't want to grade them, but I have to say, seeing Steve Sparks step off that boat in Waikiki Yacht Club, having seen what he had got through and overcome on that row, because that was as difficult as the North Pacific in many ways. If I was going to highlight one, that would be it for me. That was quite a special moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's that which forms the basis of your book, is that right?
Well, the first book was Around the Pacific. That takes a story up to 2009 when Chris and I crossed the Pacific successfully. I thought that was obviously the end of my adventures and the end of my book writing, but then the next book, or the latest book that came out in July, was Never Leave a Man Behind, and that covers the story right from day one, going to the Falklands or return to the Falklands to Steve Grenham, our adventures in kayaking, and then eventually, obviously, the adventure with Sparky crossing the North Pacific in 2018.
Quite incredible. And it was published last year, wasn't it? 2020.
Yeah, July.
Yeah. Okay.
Perfect year.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we all had time to read, for sure.
Yeah.
So tell me just a little bit more around Cockleshell Endeavours and the work that you're doing and looking to do with veterans.
Well, as I say, it evolved principally around those two projects. But we also we raised money for the Royal Marines charity on the back of all those projects, and we purchased some folding kayaks that the Royal Marines Kayaking Association now have, which are available for veterans to use. They've only got, and it wouldn't even have to be Royal Marines purely. If there's veterans out there that want to get involved, that need access to that equipment and it'll be useful, get in touch with us and we can find that kit for you. They take part in the Devices to Westminster. We had a recovering veteran and a serving Royal Marine took part in the Yukon Great River Quest. A fantastic experience, and one of the best experiences I've had in that race. And I've just had 4 Royal Marines, 2 serving, 2 veterans, recovering veterans from the Afghan conflict, literally just arrived in Barbados. In fact, as we speak, trying to get them out of Barbados, kicking and screaming, so they can come back to lockdown in the UK.
Yeah, that's a choice, isn't it? Really?
yeah. But it's. As I said at the beginning, I think these projects, sadly, it's not the cure for cancer, but it's a way to help people back onto the track. And as much as you can never rest on your laurels, there has never been more support for the service community than there is now. That's, I can see that. I've worked with the charities enough to know that the fantastic job they're doing. It's not perfect. There are things that they would admit need improving, but that facility's there, and Cockleshell Endeavour really is just another little bolt-on project that helps towards that, getting people on that track to recovery.
Yeah, and there's been a lot more kind of public awareness, hasn't there, I think, around the need for help, both physical and mental. And I think the point you made at the very beginning of this around the transition back into Civvy Street is huge and needs to be handled with care and with so the person feels safe in that environment, that transition. But there's also been some pretty high profile, I think about Prince Harry, people involved with also helping to raise awareness as well. Do you think it's kind of the tide has turned and this has got a bit of momentum to it now?
I think it's fantastic that that's happened. It's definitely got momentum. I'm also aware that that momentum's come from basically because we've had major conflicts that we've seen, and that people have, they've affected people because their families are involved in Afghan and Iraq. And I'm also aware that as those conflicts fade into the background, the public might forget, or not forget, but it won't be in the forefront of their mind. But the people that they're helping, they still need help when they're 50, 60, 70 years old. So that help doesn't go away. That requirement for help doesn't go away. And that's the important thing for me, is that, it's in the public, at the forefront of the public mind now. Just by the virtue of normal life, it won't always be like that. We have to make sure that things are in place to help people when it's not the central topic for people.
Yeah, and that's really valid. That's really valid. It's not a moment of time, is it? This is something which is consistent, which is there and will continue to be there by nature of how we are as a human dynamic, for sure. So what's next, Mick? What are you working on now? Can you share?
Not really, no. I would love to. There are a lot. I think the overriding next would be to get the Cockleshell Endeavour onto a footing where I could reliably create projects on an annual basis, which I'm at the point of doing until our friend COVID came along, so that these projects are available for people to use on a consistent basis. It's been very much, we'll do the show right here sort of thing as we've gone along, because it's been on quite a small level. But I think what we've demonstrated with the things we've done is the value of it and the worth of it. Now it's about creating it on a broader scale, so more people can get involved. They don't have to go and kayak around the Falklands or row across the Pacific. Get on a boat for a weekend, kayaking down a river in the UK. It's where they're doing it's irrelevant. It's that principle of getting people working together on something physical on the water, where they're going to sit and have a chat and forget some of their other problems and get them back on track. It's a simple way to help people out. So long term, hopefully we can do that on a bigger scale. But we've met a little bit of a challenge. We've had them before, so we'll get over that and move on.
Yeah, absolutely. It kind of reminds me of an equation I often use in the work that I do: behaviour plus situation equals outcome. And if you don't like the outcome, but you can't change the situation, there's only one area of flexibility, and that's in the way that you behave, your attitude, and everything that comes into play. And it kind of feels like there's two ways that comes to life with the work that you're doing. One, it's the person has, take Sparky as an example, has already changed the way they're behaving in order to allow them to do a challenge such as that, but also that by when you talked about your 4 months there on your when you were isolated on your own, in that sense, you're constantly changing your behaviour, your thought processes in order to cope with the situation, I assume.
Yeah, well, again, it's one of the biggest lessons I learned, probably on the solo, definitely on the solo race, and it's a simple lesson now. I've learned it, but again, this will sound sentimental. The North Pacific basically stops you all the way. It's not a trade winds route, so it's attritional. You're fighting to get miles every day. About 2 months into that trip, I was literally getting pushed back, not by big storms, but by 10, 15 knots in the wrong direction over a period of about 7 or 8 days. Every 10 miles I went forward, 15 miles I went back, and it was literally driving me mental. And I was as close to being defeated during that period of time as I've ever been on a rowing boat. I was literally screaming with frustration at this constant 1 step forward, 2 steps back. And by pure chance, we had our deck speakers, and my brother had done the playlist for the music constantly on. And out of the deck speakers, when I was just at the lowest point, a song that was an album track from a group I'd never have had. It was literally put on them by my brother for that reason. It was called Charmed Life, and it was Divine Comedy. And
I know.
This song came out, and a verse in it was, I'll misquote it now, but it was, sometimes life is like being afloat in a raging sea in a little rowboat with the waves just trying to wash you overboard. But if you take your chances and you ride the luck and never, 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 never give up, those waves will take you to a friendly shore. And in 1 nanosecond, my mood, my approach, my morale, everything went from defeated to unbeatable. As ridiculous as that sounds, that song was just the catalyst for changing everything. And the lesson it taught me, because nothing changed. The next 8 days, I was still going backwards more than I was going forwards. But the one thing that had changed from that one incident was my approach to the situation. I'd gone from being defeated to being, I'll get through this.
Mm.
And it taught me that lesson that whatever your short-term circumstances, which you may not be able to control, one thing you can always control is your approach.
Mm.
Make that a positive approach, and I'll guarantee it'll make a positive outcome more likely. It's lessons go. It's probably the biggest lesson.
Oh, Mick, what a beautiful story. That's incredible. I know that track. Yeah, I'm going to go and listen to it. I love Divine Comedy.
It's fantastic.
Yeah, but that just so beautifully encapsulates it. Mick, thank you so much for your time today. I reckon I might end up booking in another podcast with you, because I could carry on talking to you for ages, for sure. Just from your benefit, or from the people listening, how can people find you? If they're interested in Cockleshell Endeavour, if they're interested in finding out more about you and supporting you, and hopefully what will be a charity or whatever moving forward, how can people find you?
Well, the Cockleshell Endeavour project, that is at www.cockleshellendeavour.com. And that's basically, you'll see pictures of the guys who've just arrived in Barbados. That's the end of that project. For me, I'm at www.189days.com.
189 days.
Yeah, that's how long it took me to row across the Pacific with Chris Martin. And the book's available on Amazon, or both books are available on Amazon, Rowing the Pacific and Never Leave a Man Behind. Or if you'd like a slightly less cheap version with a signature, contact me through the 189 Days website, and I would happily send a signed copy out. I would happily give the copies out, but apparently my publisher tells me that's not how.
No, I don't think that's how you. No, I get that. I think your publisher might be slightly commercially wise there.
They seem to be quite annoyed about giving them away.
Yeah, absolutely. I will be, without a doubt, going on www.189days to do exactly that, to get a copy of the book, because I would love to read certainly both, but Never Leave a Man Behind is the one that really resonated. So I'd love to do that. Mick, thank you so much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. And I look forward to finding out more about your next endeavour, and to see how that progresses. So I really do appreciate your time.
No, my pleasure. Thanks for the invite.
Very welcome. Thank you, Mick Dawson. I think without a shadow of a doubt, we will be speaking again, not least of all to find out what it is he's up to that he can't tell us about right now. But there's some fabulous messages coming through from that podcast, and what a beautiful way to leave it. So you can find us on iTunes, you can find us on Spotify and Google Music, and any other ways that you might get your podcast. Please share shamelessly, and please add comments. That all helps us raise the awareness of our podcast. So from me, Pip Lever, some of you might remember as Pip Thomas, Pip Lever, and Bitesize Edge, thank you very much, and have a fabulous day.